Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today, we are extremely fortunate and extremely lucky to be running this panel discussion on the topic of innovation, an inevitable process, how innovations are created to invent, implement, and use. Now, before we begin, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions in the audience. Could you please raise your hand if you are a student? Could you please raise your hand if you have recently graduated in the past 5 years? Could you raise your hand if you are currently working in a tech organization? Wow, excellent. Could you please raise your hand if you are an international participant, not from Russia? Could you raise your hand if you are from Russia? Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today on this panel. My name is Noor El-Din Hussein. I am from Egypt, currently living in London, working for International SOS, a world leader in travel risk technology. For the past 10 years, I have been pretty much traveling the world, moderating conferences, events, seminars, and I'm very, very happy to be here in Russia again for my first time in Sochi, fourth time in Russia, and very, very pleased to be here with you all. Now, thank you. Today, I would like to introduce the guests that we have on our panel discussion. First off, we have Nikolai Nikiforov, Minister of Communications and Mass Media of Russia. We have German Gref, CEO, Chairman of the Executive Board of Sberbank of Russia. We have Mikhail Abyezov, the Minister of Open Government Affairs. Kirill Varlamov, Director of the Internet Initiatives Development Fund. And last but not least, we have Simbarasha Muriru, Director of Orson Energy Zimbabwe. Now, during this panel, I urge you to make the most of this time. I attended so many panels, and from my experience, panel discussions are either extremely exciting or they're not. I intend to make sure this panel is extremely exciting. So, think a lot, think about what information you'd like to get out of the audience today and the moderators and the panelists. Don't be afraid, there's no question that is a wrong question. There's no question that is a stupid question. If a question is something you're interested on, feel free to ask it. Also, I ask you to be present. Think about it. This is an opportunity that not so many people around the world get. Try to, instead of hearing, try listening. Instead of just seeing, start looking and be 100% present in this moment. Forget about your camera, forget about your phone. Just focus on what is here now and today. Now, thank you. You don't have to clap every time I finish my paragraph. So, when thinking on the topic of education and innovation, one of the things that came to my mind was innovation leaps. If you think about it, electricity, television, internet, all of these have been innovation leaps. Every 10 to 20 years, an invention or an innovation comes to our world, and it makes a huge leap for humanity. It takes us forward by more than 100 years. Everything in between is just very small baby steps. Now, today, we have one of our panelists who will be sharing a little bit with us on their point of view on innovation and their point of view on different levels of innovation. So if you please welcome German Grev, who will be sharing a little bit about the different levels of innovation and what they believe are.
Good morning. We prepared a small presentation for you, and I've got a very ambitious job of trying to make it in 10 minutes. But in the beginning, I would like to show you some slides that are hopefully visible. The slides on the value of time. It is known that we've got two kinds of resources, renewable and non-renewable, and perhaps the most important and the most crucial non-renewable resource is the time. And because of this, we chose for ourselves, for the most important objective of our business as a bank, not just the financial resources that we give to the people in pursuit of their dreams, but we are calling ourselves a bank of time, a bank that saves the time for our clients, the time that they would be better off using for some other, much more important areas of their lives, as opposed to the need to spend that time on interacting with the bank clerks or on choosing certain financial services. We see that today the key trend that is permeating pretty much everything is digitalization. This is the departure online. Things and people are literally leaving, going to the internet. Most of the services are going online. The overwhelming majority of services are. And if you look one level below, you will see that the structure of the GDP in the most developed countries sees services reach up to 80% of GDP volume, and industrial production, the production of goods, is going from 70 or 80% to the levels of 25 or even lower percent. And this is the key trend that is defining the framework for this entire conversation. This is the transition, the transformation of the economies into economies of services. Any economy is becoming an economy of services as opposed to production. This is a very important point to understand. I'm going to come back to it when we talk about the future of professions and trades and the future of economic models, of business models as a whole. No one knows what the world is going to look like 10 years down the line. And if we talk about Sberbank, we actually brought down the strategic planning horizon to 3 years because all our previous strategies intended for 5 years show that we don't spot the trends. We can't guess 5 years ahead because the cycles have accelerated very quickly. We need to transition to strategic planning that looks forward 10 years out, 10 decades out, but we need to plan the tactical action plan at 3 years at most. If you talk about this predictive capability, we can obviously quote Bill Gates of 1981, who famously said that personal computers will never want more than 640 kilobytes of random access memory. We look at this quote today, and fun is the only thing you can have. The only, conclusion that you can make is only one: never say never. You know, there's small drawing. I've got 2 daughters of 9 and 11, and I found this tape, this magnetic tape, the audio tape, in some archive of mine, some wardrobe, and I showed them what it is. They are completely lost when they looked at it. They twisted it right and left. They tried toying with it because a toy is the only intent that they can find for it. They couldn't fathom that this is a carrier of information, that you can actually put it somewhere and use it for something. They've never seen devices where you can put it in. They laughed. They thought of different functions for it, but none of them, not one of those two girls, used a proper name for it. The flash key is obviously an analog of today, but the next generation will probably look with the same surprise at the flash keys. If you look at the generational history of competition, we can see that over different decades, different countries found themselves at the cutting edge of implementing innovations. In the 1960s, it was the Soviet Union. That was the first space flight. You saw Buran, that's our first multiple-use spacecraft. We invested heavily as a Soviet Union in innovations. The structure of those investments were determined by the competition with the United States of America. The 1980s were dominated by Japan. Sony, the company that manufactured innovative products, power batteries, the first portable devices were created to store information, cameras, photographic equipment. The 1990s saw the domination of the United States. Those innovations were mostly related to the internet, the invention of internet. Those companies that were involved in the internet were very advanced with manufacturing hardware. They structured the information that the internet started to be filled with. In 2000s, it was certainly China, in our opinion. China made a quantum leap forward in everything that related to the most advanced, fast-moving networks, high-speed rail. In purchasing power parity terms, China is the largest economy in the world, and very soon it's going to become the largest economy in absolute terms. And this is certainly the ecosystems. Yesterday, you may have seen Alibaba's founder, Jack Ma, and you can name several other ecosystems. That's Baidu, that's Tencent, both of China. The technological leaps in China, companies like Haier, they own 30% of the global market, 30% of the global market for manufacturing household appliances. That's a colossal shift, a technological shift. What this slide is going to be showing in 2010s is still an open question, but this is obviously a story of success for someone that is not clearly determined yet, not manifestly apparent. Any success story is a story of innovation. These are the trends that we see define the leadership in innovations by great companies that you also see in this slide. This is certainly a great support and great influence of the state, the creation of an ecosystem for innovations. All the countries that achieved a breakthrough achieved that breakthrough because efficient and effective governments created efficient and effective ecosystems. Silicon Valley, Israel. Israel is cited today as one of the most unusual countries in terms of size, yet a very advanced example of what competition can show for human intelligence. Israel did wonderful things for private initiatives. The state in Israel thought up an untrivial model for innovations. The government subsidized any private investor that invested most revenue from any project into innovation. And the government no longer dominated the direction of innovation. They simply supported the trends that the private sector went along with. This is a very interesting example indeed for the new role of the government, when the government stopped dominating, when the government became very sensitive, very responsive to the trends in the market of innovations. Technologies transformed the entire economic landscape. We saw those technologies, we tried ranking those technologies based on their disruptive influence for the economy, for the macroeconomics as a whole. This trend will continue in all likelihood until the end of this decade, but what trends will dominate further on? We can see some of those today. The mobile technologies are moving away from the foreground. Probably last year, we see the ascent of a new trend, everything that is related to artificial intelligence. Technologies can be much more accessible for everyone. Today, pretty much everywhere in the developed universities over the world, we see a trend of creating labs, so-called lean innovations laboratories. Those frugal innovations is when groups of scientists innovate for things that are accessible and affordable for all. Manu Prakash of Stanford is a very interesting case in point. His foldscope, or a microscope that is worth, that costs 50 cents, it is getting a lot of foothold in the world, a lot of footprint. About 300 items, 300 million items are already used in the world. Africa, India, a lot of kids, when they get access to these small and cheap devices, they become chemists and biotechnologists and all kinds of other scientists, and that changes the entire landscape of innovation and development in these countries. The digital footprints that people generate when they go online paved the way for big data. Big data was probably the most revolutionary technology that was born in the 20th century and was taken into the 21st century. We generate a lot of footprints, whether we want it or not, and it's actually very entertaining to observe right now people who think that they maintain their privacy, having bought some Nokia phones that don't have those smartphone features. You know, up to a certain point, you could have console yourself. You could have found consolation and comfort in maintaining your invisibility for someone whom you are afraid of. This is no longer possible. We are surrounded by sensors and all kinds of vision. You can certainly hide from that, but you need to relocate. You need to live in a cave of some sort. If you don't want to be observed in real time by the huge number of CCTV or sensor owners, just relocate to a cave. And the traces that believe, the footprints that believe, without willing to do so, they allow the owners of those footprints to make conclusions much more precise than we can understand ourselves or than our families can understand ourselves, our next of kin. So the government is facing very dramatic challenges in the wake of these technological shifts. The changing labor market. I'm not one of those alarmists who think that robots are going to replace the people very soon. I think this is a great exaggeration. We don't have a problem of going somewhere from the places where we get replaced by robots. Our economies are no longer flat. We are a 3D economy these days. If it used to take a piece of land to become rich and successful, if it used to take access to production and tools and capital, you don't have to have those things anymore. You need to have access to knowledge, and you need to have the soft skills like flexibility of thinking, creativity, and the ability to collaborate. And you can think up any occupation for yourself you want. 80% of the economies are about services these days, and this is a guarantee for employment. Don't you be afraid of anything. You won't be needing promoters like Weinsteins in Hollywood. Economy has changed in a way that you can now make a video with your song these days, place it on YouTube, get 2 million people in viewership, and all those 2 million are going to queue to become your producers, to produce in professional studios. This is a change in the economy. This is a guarantee for employment for further generations. Never mind the disappearance of some professions, a whole number of professions. You can make a long list of those. It's not a fact that they disappear, all of them. Probably these will disappear. You know, self-driving cars. You know, we've got 1.3 million people. We've got 250 million drivers in the world. We are on the verge of these professions getting replaced for the most part, and so on and so forth.
But that does not mean that these people will be left out of the job market. And obviously, there will be totally new professions, totally new jobs that will be much more productive for humanity and much more interesting and exciting for those people who will actually do them. Now, what is of critical importance in this environment is the ability to change, the readiness for change. Now, the progress has its costs. The demand structure changes quite rapidly, and the desires changes as well. The product cycle is becoming much more rapid. What we call time to market is measured not in years and not even in months, but in days, and sometimes in minutes. The planning horizon becoming shorter, and actually humans cannot keep up with such speed of the progress. But one of the responses to this challenge is the combination between humans and the machine. When people cannot face these challenges and trends, he can do that with the machine. It's not that we're talking a machine instead of a human or a human instead of a machine, but no, the combination of them together. And if we see on this slide the manufacturing in Germany, we can see that the macroeconomic trends support and what I say right now. I think that all these fears are a little bit too exaggerated, like the fact that unemployment will be our future, and the fixed income, fixed social income will be for those precariats who will be left out of jobs. I think that alarmists are not right here. Now, this is a very important slide. How do you increase the competitiveness of the economies? We concluded that the most proper in terms of macroeconomic measurements indicator is the volume of high-tech experts. If we measure that, we can see that today's leaders are, of course, Germany, Korea, and of course we can see a triumph of China on this slide. We can see that triumph of China. And China has grown in the last 15 years by 6-fold, and obviously this is a great success. Now, a few words about Russia. Russians are great inventors. It has always been the case that in Russia there were a lot of inventions made, but they were used in other countries. And if you look at Kalashnikov assault rifle, actually, the word Kalashnikov, I think, is one of the most well-known words in the world after Russia. More than 100 million copies of this assault rifle have been created, and all of them are pirate, non-license-based assault rifle production. Neither Kalashnikov nor Russians and Russia got anything from that invention, and there are many more examples like that. We can see that 90% of Kalashnikov turnover went to the US, but no one talks about the intellectual property rights and payment for that. And Russia have never received such payments, or Kalashnikov company has never received such payments. And the last slide, which I think is very adequate to the topic that we discussed today, Do not be afraid to think. Do not be afraid to think out of the framework. Mahatma Gandhi said that you are not noticed at first, then they start to laugh at you, and after that you win. So be persistent and believe in yourself.
German, one slide in your presentation I found very interesting. I'm a child of the 80s, and I could very much relate to the slide that had all the different innovations from every country. And most recently, obviously, we can all see and relate to the largest social media companies being driven out of the United States, some of the largest high-tech and innovative companies in the world, whether it's Apple, whether it's Uber, whichever organization you think of, many of it originates from a specific country or from at least one particular country that we can experience today. Now, I had a very interesting conversation with Nikolai before entering the panel, and I thought I want to ask him a question as a follow-up from what German just shared. Nikolai, you've had very interesting political views, and I really love your political view on the fact that you believe programmers should be trained from childhood, just like athletes. Individuals, young people should not enter into programming at an older age, and you're very much working on fostering that ecosystem and culture to allow young people to drive more innovation. Now, let me try to spice things up a little bit. What would you say if I'm a young Russian person and I tell you, I don't think I can be a successful tech entrepreneur in Russia. I need to go out to the USA or to go out in any other country because I don't think I can be successful in Russia. What would be your response to that?
Hello, everyone. Dear friends, if you asked that question to me, obviously I would do anything to make sure you change your mind. I am firmly committed to the idea that Russia today in 2017 is one of the best places in the world to unlock your potential in terms of making true the most courageous innovations that you have in your mind, and you will get support from various government authorities. And that is so. That is truly so. It is true that all the digital economy is about people. It is based on the knowledge, this economy based on the knowledge and on the data, and it has been generated by the people. And human capital is of the most importance. Many traditional factors like natural resources that shaped the line of our geopolitics is going to the second or third places. They're having secondary roles. So people are the most important asset. And thanks to telecommunication technologies, thanks to the new transportation solutions like aircrafts and other things, we became very mobile. Boundaries is not the problem anymore. So if we do not create an attractive ecosystem, in this environment, the talented people whose ideas were not supported will go to another country with a more friendly environment. Now, you asked about programmers. Currently, Russia has around 0.5 million programmers and developers. My favorite idea is that, yes, you need to prepare the coders, the programmers, at the school bench, because it is quite late to prepare a good programmer at the university. But if you look at the quantitative indicators, what I like is, what saying I like, what quote I like is that our country needs 1 million developers. If you compare it with other countries like the US, it was mentioned many times before, they need 4 million developers. India needs 3 million developers and China 2 million developers. Well, at least Russia needs 1 million developers of its own. Just 5 years ago, IT experts and programmers were thought of as someone who develops a program code, someone who does something for a software product. Or a telecommunication expert, telecommunication engineer, was thought of as a person who actually makes telecommunication network. But right now, programmers are not for programming, and network experts are not only to create network. They have become a platform to launch a new transformation, basically in all spheres of our life. In Russia, we are committed to the idea that we need to have a competitive and flexible jurisdiction for the most brave processes of transformation, to make sure that they are realized easier than in other countries. It has started from December 2016, when President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, said that the digital economy should be a top priority. It was said during his annual statement, and yesterday during the Valdai Club discussion, he told about these two qualities that Russia should have: flexibility and competitiveness. And our goal is to make sure that we fine-tune the regulations and legislative base, that it accommodates you, ambitious young people, to make sure that even the most outlandish innovative project will see the light. We will be ready to support any ideas, any innovative ideas, and we will ensure the flexibility to change the law as quickly as needed, because many things today are not even prescribed in the traditional legal language. For instance, let's talk about self-driving cars. How do you test them in the streets of our cities? Who is to blame if there is a car accident? Or perhaps you should create special areas for them, or are we going to test them in the usual traffic? And there are many more examples like that, dozens of examples like that. Together with you, we should find the new responses to these challenges, and to make sure that Russia is one of the best places in the world, and we will need to develop that ecosystem. So I invite you to work and live here in our country and to implement your ideas.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate what you mentioned about the creation of an ecosystem and an environment for innovation. I have a question for Mikhail, and I think before I ask this question, I just want to poll quickly in the audience. Raise your hand if you do not have a programming degree. If you did not study programming. Okay, Mikhail, I want to ask you this question not as a minister. I want you to take off the minister hat a little bit and share from your experience and from the route that you have taken. What would be your advice, or what would you think if someone says, I do not have a degree in programming, so I cannot be successful in the technology and innovation sector?
Good day, dear friends. Thank you. I would like to thank the moderator for such an unusual question, an exciting question. And removing my hat of a minister, I will try to respond. Now, I think everyone has their dreams. And if you rephrase the "I have a dream" phrase, you can rephrase it and say "I had a dream." When I was 16, I really wanted to prove the Fermat theorem. I was born in Minsk in 1972, and I was into mathematics. When I was 16, I was studying in 1988. I was studying in a Moscow special preparatory school for the Moscow University with a mathematician background, and I was obviously into science and into programming science throughout my life and throughout my education. When I entered in Moscow University, there were major events that happened in my life because the Soviet Union collapsed. There were new countries that appeared. Basically, the regime, the mode of life that we were accustomed to collapsed. We understood it very well. It was transparent for us. There were private businesses that appeared. And when I was studying in the Moscow University, when I was 19 years old, it was 1991, I decided to do business. Now, the first reason of the Fermat theorem was proved, so I lost my one of my dreams. The second reason was that I wanted to live in a new life. That does not mean I was striving to be rich, although obviously young men love to have the dreams of having a good, glamorous life. I was 19 when I created my family. That was 1991, yes. But what I was attracted by this new economy, new environment, is that there was some kind of dynamics that started. There was a huge energy, a huge drive that was generated, that encouraged, that motivated people, that inspired people. A lot of young people were inspired by it, and not even the young ones were inspired by it. They developed themselves. There was this dynamism, this energy, and I was inspired by that, inspired even more than mathematics. So I decided to drop out of the university and do business. When I was 25, I started to work in a large energy company. Mr. Graf was on the board of directors. I was the deputy chairman or deputy director of this company. Then I went back to the business. Then I was in politics. Quite early, not as early as Nikolai, because Nikolai was not even 30 when he became a minister. Think about that. This is the youngest minister in human history. Well, everything is possible in Russia. Exactly. So yes, dreams come true not only if you work in Gazprom. And you know, when we talk about innovations, when we talk about young people, I think that the foundation, the backbone that is used to create something new is that people can make paradigm shifts, go out, think out of the box. When we were studying, and Mr. Graf was studying, and I was studying, that was the era of the Soviet Union. The value was to select a profession for life, once and for life. Create one family for life. Even if you are not happy, you should stick to your family and to your profession. This was a part of what was the right thing to do. However, now people change their professions 5, 10 times during their lifetime. They find their success. They build their success stories, and they find the areas where they can be the most successful, and that is inspire them. And perhaps a piece of advice that I want to share with the young ones: be afraid of the routine. Do not be afraid to change, because routine and all that marshes will destroy innovations, and your changes will encourage innovations. Think out of the box, change the professions, educate during your life. And this is how you become successful. I don't really like the name of our panel discussion. How do you create innovations? Well, you know, if we want to make a soup, we open a cookbook and we see the recipe there. And if you follow this recipe, you'll get a good soup. But it is not possible to make a good soup without the passion and love to what you do. You cannot teach innovation using the recipes. The innovations are created when you have a desire, when you have a passion. Bill Gates, Jack Ma, Herman Graf, they are innovators. What they have in common? These are the people who serve as an examples for all the young people. They are passionate to what they do. They love what they do. And it is much more important than the formulas that you learned at school. This is the recipe for innovations. The state should support you. This is why we work. Obviously, we have problems and we have failures, yes. We can say that human capital is the most important thing. What happens to you when you lose your wallet? You are very sad because there were your money therein. When young people come from the country and go to another country, many in politics think that this is just statistics, but this is just the same capital, the same wallet that is outflowing, that you lose. And I think it would be right for us to see that we are really failing when we do not create this friendly environment. We should not focus on statistics. We should focus on each person who does not know how to use his potential in Russia. We should understand what are our mistakes. I have my own interest and experience in terms of education. My son, elder son, he's 23 years old, and when he was 17, he said, I want to educate abroad. I want to educate myself in an American university because, you know, I like this dynamics, the sports, the culture, the conditions are great there. And I said, well, you're an adult, you can do anything you like. You can get your education there. I'll try to help you, obviously. And it was interesting for me how his views would change depending on the experience that he gets, not only in Russia, but abroad as well. And I think that one of the happiest days for me was when he graduated from this university. He came back to Russia and he said, I want to go to an army.
Right now, he's saying that that was a conversation of strength showing. He was trying to prove himself. I proved myself. We had a drink. He was 22 at the time. He had a family at the time. For a rather long time by then, as I did. He married at 19. He had a degree, a graduate degree. He actually had a great proposition, not through my connections, but through his own ability. He had a great job proposition, but he said, I want to be a paratrooper, at least for a while. He came back from the armed service. He is now trying to get a job. And he comes and I ask him, who's going to wait for you? The contract is gone. You have to start from scratch. Well, hopefully he's going to have his own share of success trials. So my question to him was, why? He is interested in experience, different kinds of experience. Going back to what I would like to tell this audience, to the young men who are just at the beginning of their journey in life, passion to break the molds, to think out of the box, to break the pattern. This is a recipe for your personal success, for your personal development, and for the innovation. keep burning without burnout, and may success come your way.
I can imagine many of you might have similar conversations with your parents around what to study, what to work, where to study, and what should you do after studies. So I thought it was very interesting hearing that story. But thinking also of all of the innovation trends and all of the new organizations that start up. There's a very famous story of a financial investor, very rich American businessman, who in the 80s was advised by many of his financial advisors, and they literally said, do not invest in the internet because this industry is unstable and it will not grow. You should invest in an industry that is very stable. For example, like videos, VHS, or Polaroid cameras, or Kodak. And it was very interesting because such industries were the ones that used to be very strong, very powerful, and overnight they had almost collapsed. Now, I had a very interesting conversation with Kirill, and we were talking about all of the projects and startup ideas that he oversees as part of his role. And I couldn't help but ask, when so many people come up with ideas, first of all, maybe raise your hand if you are thinking of becoming an entrepreneur or if you are an entrepreneur. Now, I thought it would be very valuable having Kirill's background and experience to share what you think are some of the barriers that young people face when they want to start their own business. And what are some of the stories that also inspire you? I mean, you see more than 20,000 accelerated projects, ranked #1 in Euro-Asia for the number of startup projects that are being accelerated. It's a massive number. What do you see are some of the barriers? What is something that if I'm sitting in the audience there and I'm thinking, I want one day to start my own business, but I don't want to face a barrier that is unexpected. What would you think would be some of these barriers?
Здравствуйте.
Hello. Thank you for your very deep question. Actually, when we had that show of hands, I saw a lot of hands that evidence that people never studied coding, and I thought, never mind. But then I saw just a few hands about the people who want to start their own business, and then I said, maybe we should do something about that. I'm going to tell you about two barriers. I'm not going to talk about the technologies of the processes. If you want to start your own business in Russia, it is as simple as it has ever been. We've got our own foundation, we've got several other entities, and there's two barriers, there's two bulkheads, as we call them. They are in the brains of entrepreneurs. Why do I talk about entrepreneurs? I think, and the team of our fund thinks, that the entrepreneur is a key person in the ecosystem of innovations. And when we speak about innovations, where they come about, when they come about, the head of the entrepreneur usually is a place where that happens. It's not the head of the technologist where that happens. What are the barriers in the head of the entrepreneurs? The barrier #1, I'm waiting for my great idea. We're all waiting for some idea. We are thinking that this idea is going to come to me and I'm going to become the next Bill Gates or next Jack Ma, and that idea never comes. That said, it's very easy to vindicate your routine with the expectation of that idea. We work the at least 8-hour-a-day routines, but we never chase our ideas. Let me tell you one very simple story of one of our startups. The project is called Stuffery. They put together a robot that is doing recruitment. They came to our accelerator with a very simple idea of creating a marketplace for recruiters. HR recruiters of a company would use that marketplace to search the candidates for vacancies, and that guy that came to me was never did any coding. He was just about HR and recruitment. They put together that marketplace. We gave them some seed financing, and they really worked on it. You know, they developed it, and then at some point they understood that it is not flying, it's not taking off. So the guy went to a coding course, 6 or 7 months. He put together his own first makeshift model, and right now he's got a program robot that is 100% replacing recruitment searches. What this robot does is screen all the CVs online. He makes a call. He says, "Hello, I'm Robot Vera. I've got several questions. I want to invite you for a interview." He fills in the gaps in the CV. He makes a video of the interview with the candidate, and then he offers everything to the employer. And the robot actually does that more efficiently and effectively than a human, because he's not lazy to make an additional call. We did actually an experiment on a 100-item sample. What they are doing right now is another robot that you can put on a table, and that robot is involved not just in the conversation with the recruiter, but also with the vacancy candidate. Regular meetings, interviews, and the robot accumulates a huge amount of information of the people who work in the companies. They actually have contracts with 200 major corporations in Russia, and they've been growing. They've been doubling every month for 10 months in a row, doubling their revenue for 10 months in a row. What they are doing already is a neural network that analyzes all these CVs. That's another track of activity for that startup. Last month, they turned the mark of 1 million resumes. And I put this question to those guys. You're looking for these simple vacancies. They are looking for vacancies in California. They are looking for employees for the supermarkets. How are you going to find a smart person, a person for a high-requiring job? And they are saying, we've got ideas. We're actually training artificial intelligence in this area. We're going to ask, who do you want this new employee to be like? Or a combination of employees, who's going to be like? The robot's going to make an interview of those two employees, and he's going to find an employee in the market, a candidate in the market, who's going to be similar to those two employees in your company. The next round of investment is about $30 million for those guys. And the project has only been in existence for 2 years. I do believe that this project is going to be one of those new unicorns, and one of that platforms where you can create where you can actually put together a huge story. Why am I telling you all these details? The idea that they have right now, it didn't come as the idea in its current shape 2 years ago. They came to this current shape by a very consistent series of trials, by a very consistent effort, diving deep into processes. They talk to recruiters, they talk to the people who screen resumes. I'm saying a very simple thing. Don't wait for a big idea. You need to understand what you really want, and you need to start moving in this direction. You need to make those small incremental steps. And the second barrier, that was the first barrier. The second barrier, and I promised you too, it's called circumstances beyond my control. We are very often blaming all kinds of circumstances, the government, the climate, education, opportunities, lack of finance, lack of connections. But then there are people like social psychologists, and they identified a very interesting thing. There's a difference in mentality between Russian citizens and Americans. It's called lack of control. For Russians, it always seems that the focus of control is external. You know, people are saying that you can't do this, you can't do this, and that is all external. Americans are always thinking, if I fail somewhere, I did something wrong. I was not smart enough, I was not energetic enough, I was not vigorous enough. And just to compare, in Americans, the external locus of control, the internal locus of control for the Americans is 55%. For Russians, it's only 15%. Only 15% of Russians blame themselves. 55% of Americans blame themselves. Also, very importantly, it's very important to find what you like. I do agree with the previous speaker. If you're not passionate about something you do, you're going to lose the momentum and energy and vigor very quickly. You're going to get bored very quickly, and you will not be able to find this energy to move for a very long time because before you hit the money. So the very simple advice about what to start with, what idea to start with, you should be looking for niches, market niches, where consumers hate their service providers. We don't like the services that the polyclinic, that the medical clinic has rented to us, the ticket office, the rail company. That's where you can innovate. That's where you can create a startup. And most importantly, do remember that if you don't start implementing your idea, someone else will certainly hire you to implement his or her dream.
The barriers that you were sharing now made me remember right after I graduated and I was a biotechnology graduate, I started my own business. I borrowed money from my family, not a lot, $300, and I decided that I will start my own business and I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs. A year and a half later, I lost the $300 and I failed miserably because I didn't have any experience in anything. 5 years later, I started my second business with $300 as well. And it was much, much more successful. And I remember when I was pitching the idea to my colleagues, they said, this idea already exists. What's new about it? There are already companies in the market doing that. I said, yes, but we're going to do it better than them. It doesn't have to be a new idea. We're going to do it better than them. There were so many social media platforms before Facebook. There was High Five, there was MySpace, there were so many others. They just did it better. So it's very interesting sharing these barriers. But I think the biggest question that I had when I was starting my own business was, do I need to have experience working in a company before starting my business, or can I just start straight away? Because the only difference between those 5 years, between the first company and the second company, between failing and not failing, was that I had a couple of years of work experience. I'm not saying that it was a requirement, but at least that was my experience. So I want to ask Simbarasha that question. You as an entrepreneur in the field of renewable energy have been quite successful on that. What's your view on this? Do you think young people need to have some experience, or do you think someone can just graduate, start their own business and be extremely successful?
I think probably our sun energy. We thought that we You needed the experience in the energy sector. We came up with a project. The project was to generate power and feed it into the national grid. That project failed. I lost my company. Then I discovered that you actually don't need experience. You need to build an ecosystem, basically. You need to understand that for your business to be successful, there are 4 pillars. There's your product, which you need to understand. There's the legal and regulatory framework, which is set by the government that you need to understand. And there's also the funding aspect, the debt that's required, the equity that's required. And you need to be able to ask a simple question that probably Mike or my fellow colleagues here will ask and say, if we give you X amount of money, what are you going to use it for? And how much do we make? Simple question, money in, money out. You need to understand that. And then the fourth important factor that brings that all together is the legal and the risk framework. You're contracting, are you allowed to do this? And basically, how can you bring your product, how can you marry your business model to the environment that you're operating in? There is no way at my age I would know all this. So I had to ask questions. I had to develop relationships with people in these various industries and basically develop my company in such a manner. So what did I do? Oxygen energy fails. Our sun energy fails. We start oxygen energy. And I said, look, I still want to do the grid-connected power plants, but there are like hundreds of these IPPs, independent power producers, that have been licensed in Zimbabwe. Our country is very light on the regulation if you want to generate power. I could probably argue that is probably the easiest. Then the guys at ZET, DC, our national utility, said, look, we've got so many offers. Why don't you just do this privately by yourself and just go to private companies and build solar on their behalf? The ministry said, you can actually do this under a power purchase agreement. The same framework that you want to have with the state utility, you can have it with your private off-takers. That was a eureka moment because the private off-takers were a different risk profile from the state utility. And what was quite interesting was that this was not even new. This framework had been in place since 2002. And this was me asking this question in 2013. So the next question that we did is we talked to a number of bankers and they said, look, if you structure your project in a certain manner, we will be able to fund it. So our first step was to then go to our client, which was then Old Mutual, and say, I know you've received so many offers for renewable energy, for solar, but I've got a different model. I want to become your second IPP. By the way, while all of this is happening, I am not a technical person. I develop hotels. My background is hospitality, so I had no idea what a kilowatt megawatt was when I started this out. And I said, you know what? We will take a different approach. We will innovate. Of all the proposals that you have, this is everything that could possibly go wrong. Forget about solar. You know, it's a simple panel, sun hits the panel, inverter, you get light. But this is everything that could possibly go wrong. And I am willing to carry that risk so that you can have your solar, but I carry the financial, the technical, and the operational risk. If I do this for you, will you sign on? So they wrote me a letter and said, yes, we will sign on. We made a trip to South Africa. We met with 2 European development banks, government-owned. They looked at the project and said, no, it's a good structure. If you structure it like this, we will basically be able to fund. So during that meeting, I learned something as well. But what was surprising, and it goes back to what I always tell entrepreneurs to dream big, is that they said there's one problem, Simba. Your project is too small, right? For us to look at it, it has to be a minimum of 10 million. The development cost, the work that goes into it, and our expected returns. Oh, by the way, there are 2 of us, so you have to make this a minimum of 20 million. I said, okay, sure, I'll do that. Just give me the conditions precedents that you guys would like to see, and I will go back to my client. Bolstered with more confidence, I went back to my clients and my stakeholders locally, and I said, look, we need to make this into a 20 megawatt project, 30 million. If we complete this checklist, we will get our money. And then we started that process. So all this time, I have no experience in energy whatsoever, but I'm learning as we go. Another key component was our government, right? To say, look, but we need to make sure that we can legally do this, and our business model and financial model will be acceptable to government. So what we sought to do is not only operate within their policy, but to complement what the government priorities are. So in my country, they have something called the Zimbabwe Agenda for Sustainable Social Economic Transformation. And it covers many aspects of the economy, from energy to investment to resource mobilization to employment. And we sought to fit our project into that particular framework. So for example, on energy conservation, if we connect our 20 megawatts, we save the government 20 because their objective was 300 megawatts by 2018. Resource mobilization, we have foreign investors wanting to put FDI into the country. It ticked all the right boxes. Again, the government started to work with us and gave us ways of improving our model. And after many months of paperwork going back and forth, I think it took us about close to 9 to 10 months to do this. The government gave us national project status for the project. And this was significant for us because it came with a number of other benefits, but key for us is that we were able to drop the cost of our project by 15 cents, meaning that our tariff to our client became more attractive. And our client, being Old Mutual, it also started to gel into what they are as an organization, in that they look to take leadership in areas of national interest. And they always take a long-term view. So energy being a big buzzword at that time, we gave them that opportunity to do that. And so we then started to engage with Old Mutual. But another important factor that is equally important as understanding your product is understanding your client and how they make decisions. Right? So for us, our clients are corporate clients. How does a blue chip client make his decision? Which departments have to look at your project before it even goes to the investment committee, before it's even approved by the board? And it's the same thing as your bank. Because before the bank approves your project, the deal team that's around you have to be able to defend your concept with their lives so they can get the first credit approval. So we now had to learn that process. So throughout building Oxygen Energy, I've had 2 banks that have walked the journey with me, a law firm, and of course my client. And we created an ecosystem where everything complements each other. All our documentation, our concepts, our financial modeling, our regulatory framework has to complement each of these different organizations. But then that creates a new challenge. It takes a long time. We conceived the idea beginning of 2015. We only signed the first major contract August 2016. So it's a long play, which means that if you don't have passion, as one of my colleagues said, for your business, you are going to get fatigued, you are going to give up. But also look at that process as an advantage, because natural selection, you weed out what in Africa we call the chancers, the pretenders, or people that are not supposed to be running the race anyway. So a key for us was just the persistence that we presented in our business and learning as we go. And when we then came to a point whereby now the key question to ask myself was, okay, fine, the banks have said that we will provide you with X amount of debt, but I need to come with 30% of that in actual equity. So that's where the funding partners come in, the equity investors. And they want to simply know, is your idea legal? Can you do it? Who is your client? Are you secure? And are we going to get the returns? And most importantly, where every young entrepreneur is going to become unstuck, have you put skin in the game? What have you given up for your business? You justify why you own X percentage of your company. This is where all the hard work comes in. And what we then did is, actually thanks to the support of our utility, ZETDC, we obtained a grant from African Development Bank that effectively took care of all the legal requirements and conditions precedents that I needed to take care of before a bank or an investor says, I'm putting money in. Your bankability study, your technical feasibility study, your contracts from your shareholders agreement, your project development agreement, your power purchase agreements, from your lender's due diligence, your financing documents. And for a project of our size, it was quite significant because just our legal costs alone are going to be $500,000. Where as a young entrepreneur would I find that? Your funders can give it to you if they know that you are going to take this, you are going to see this project through. You're not going to leave them hanging because they are actually taking the financial risk. If anything goes wrong, you walk away and it's a great story to talk about to your friends in a bar. But somewhere, in a bank somewhere, in a fund somewhere, someone has to justify why they're now X amount of dollars light. So learn as you go, establish ecosystems, learn from your government, your banks, your legal teams, because they're the ones that are going to help you innovate in such a way that when it's time for you to go to market, you don't come unstuck. Secondly, don't give up. We took, as I said, 2 years to develop our projects. I've had to walk close to 8 kilometers to make a pitch because I didn't have a car. I'd sold it and yet I'd lost it in my first business, and I just didn't have enough transport money to get there. I've had to walk 8 kilometers. I've had to sleep on my friend's couch. I've had to go to meet Barclays Bank in South Africa. I've had to take a flight. All I had was a ticket and a Gautrain card to get me to the meeting and get me back to Zimbabwe. But all of that I learned, and all of that inspired me never to give up. Who would have thought that I'll be sitting in a panel here telling my story, or I would have had to shake President Putin's hand? Years ago, I would have never thought about it. But never give up on your idea. It takes time. It's a long play. And the harder it is, the more valuable your sweat equity to your project is. The more you can justify why. A financier cannot come to you and say, look, fantastic idea, but why should you be part of the ownership structure? Why can't you just be an employee? Like, no, I bled for this idea, I developed it, and we are at this stage because of the work that I put in. So in a nutshell, this is probably what I would advise young entrepreneurs.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. I think I have so many questions myself. I have so many questions that I feel the urge of just asking them to our guests, because even for me personally, I feel like I would benefit. However, I feel it would be a bit unfair to bring you all here, sit you down, and at least not ask you some questions. So we'll open the floor now to some questions. Please keep in mind, you can ask the question generally to the panel, and anyone can then raise their hand should they want to take the question. You could also ask a question to a particular guest. And for my guests, please feel free to also follow up. Should you feel the need that I think I can also add to that question, please feel free to go ahead. So we can take the first question. Yes, the young man with the cap.
Good morning to everyone. You know, I'm very much in a worry because, you know, this is a major question, so perhaps a round of applause because I need some psychological support. I think this is a fantastic event, and, you know, I thought that I would just listen to these fantastic speakers. Mikhail told a fantastic and exciting story about going outside of your framework, thinking outside of the box, about Nikolai. That was a very inspiring story. Yeah, anyway, this is very important. It's very important to achieve some great achievements, and you will be on the peak, on the drive. I will ask a question now. Now the question is for Mr. Gref. I'm studying at the third year in Physical and Mathematical University, and I want a challenge. I am afraid of this. Could you please accept me in your team? That's my challenge. This is what I'm afraid of right now. So I'm challenging myself. I want to read, I want to learn. I understand that Sberbank is a very high-tech company, and I understand its path of development. I'm not afraid of anything, of universities, of exams, and so on and so forth. But Sberbank is a challenge for me. Working in your team, that would be a fantastic challenge, an exciting challenge for me. So this is my question, and I think that I'll be supported by the speakers and by everyone present here.
Thank you very much for your energy. German, I think you see a lot of energy from young people similarly, correct?
Thank you. Thank you for not being afraid of asking the question despite the pressure. This is a good attribute. Could you come to me after this session? We will talk about that.
The young man in the suit there.
Good day to everyone. My name is Arner Meleev. I'm from Tatarstan Republic. My question to Herman Gref and to Nikolai Nikiforov. At the opening meeting, at the opening event, there was a young guy who presented a fantastic project related to the social project management project. Innovation project management. So they gathered some garbage in their region, and they kind of used some systems to collect this garbage. They got the points for that, and they went to the hospitals. They had their own cards, or they had their bank accounts, so they were kind of offered some help, and or the Ministry of Healthcare provided some support. So anyway, they were given special points that they used for diagnostics or for some healthcare purposes. So, Mr. Gref, do you think it is possible to implement such projects in our country when people will collect garbage, or will remove the dumps and will be supported by some of the ministries, and that will be kind of an ecosystem for the that will give the support in the view like the points to these people who do such projects. Do you think it is possible, well, given the severity of the situation? Thank you. Well, first of all, if you are going to wait for someone to support you, I'm afraid that all garbage will be collected by then. Everything related to these processes that you talked about, this is not a task of the government, of the state. This is the task for the municipality. Perhaps there will be a head of municipality that should support such efforts. Then yes, that will be great. The probability is like 50-50, I would say. It's like about that joke about dinosaur. Could you see a dinosaur on the streets of Moscow? It's 50-50 chance. Well, there is absolutely not important who is going to support this or that. If you talk about innovation, if you hope that someone will support you, do not start with your innovation project. One simple thought that I would like to share. Perhaps I was not good in voicing it over and conveying it. There is a century when we go from centralized system to decentralized system. We migrate to decentralized system. And large corporations, the problems are unique. You want to be involved in some interesting and exciting project, or how can you invent an exciting project when you have no resources? And my task is to get the right people who will be responsible for that and who will actually make that innovations and make these ideas. And this is a major problem for me. This is a major challenge. This is a non-trivial task because every one of us thinks that we are capable to do everything, but this is not so. People who can think something up and actually implement that, as Kirill said, you don't need to have the coding skills. Nikolai said that we need 1 million developers. I do not agree with that. Actually, India, who has 4 million developers, is facing a major problem because the era of IT experts is over. And these IT experts will have to be employed elsewhere. Right now, we are seeing a century of very energetic people that are not afraid of these barriers in their heads, you know, these barriers that actually prevents us to address the problem of garbage, not in our country, but in our heads. If you remove that garbage in your heads, this is when you will really fly and will be afraid of nothing else.
Very much. Let's try to have one of the young ladies there. Yes, the young lady in the red vest.
Добрый день, уважаемые спикеры.
Good morning, dear speakers and dear participants. I do appreciate my colleague from the Tatarstan delegation for letting me put the question. My name is Kirill Kolklakov. I represent the delegation of Tatarstan, the Republic of Russia, and the Ministry of Communications in Tatarstan. Dear speakers, I do thank you kindly for such inspiring presentations, and I think I'm going to be supported by the audience. Now, my question is to Mr. Greff and to Nikolai Anatolievich Nikiforov. What is, in your opinion, the role of a human amid the fourth industrial revolution, in light of the active development of AI technologies, and what must be done these days to stay relevant amid the vigorous digitalization of all the areas of our life? You know, despite the artificial intelligence being the main trend, and I did mention this more than once, artificial intelligence is still in its infancy. It's still specific. It's still specialist. Before we achieve a generalist AI, it's going to be at least 10 years. So it's certainly an open question, but it's going to be at least 10 years. And the whole question is about that you shouldn't be trying to embrace the things that you will never be able to embrace. The scope to apply yourself is pretty much anywhere. You just need to ask yourself what you find the interest for the most. This is the most difficult thing of all. What do you find interest for? Mikhail mentioned it, you know, the passion, the need for enthusiasm. If you do have it, everything's going to roll. We've got a huge number of examples when people who are passionate resolved completely unresolvable tasks. I mean, you don't have enough time to enumerate all those instances, but don't you get emotional enough to follow the herd, as we put it? I mean, if it's the age of engineering, everyone is in engineering. You graduate, and 10% get employed as engineering, but then everyone is going into sales. Now we have a peaking out trend when everyone used to be lawyers and economists. You don't need any more coders than you have today. We've got a whole number of coders, programmers, whom we are fighting with. We don't need them anymore. In DevOps, people are no longer coders. They are task setters, they are testers. It's not just about coding in a certain language. If you bring me the technical brief, the tasking, I'm going to put together an algorithm that will deliver on this. You don't need the coders anymore. So my main advice is ask yourself what you like, what you love. Don't do the things you don't want to do. And in the things that you can love, you can do anything, because technologies these days are pretty boundless, and you don't have to be qualified. I mean, you can take it to a whole new ball game. I fully agree with Nikolai Anatolievich, who said that Russia is a huge field of opportunities because we don't have enough competition, because we've got Gazprom. In half the country, we've got monopolies. And in these monopolies, we can steal a lot of business. So my first advice is be fearless. Do not be afraid of anything. Believe in yourself. Do the things you love. And do this as passionately as you can. Until you are young, you can do this 18 hours a day, and you will certainly succeed. I will probably add something. I may be on a different track versus what you are asking about. You're certainly interested in technologies, but the greatest innovations are inside of us. And no one really knows the reserves, the spare capacity of humans, of every one of you present in this audience. Many capabilities that we have are dormant, still waiting to be tapped into. Our job is to help you find the formats where you will be able to wake those capabilities up. The educational skills, the adaptability to digital economy, that's all very important. But guys, go and learn to dance tango. I'm talking serious. Guys, go and take choir lessons. Learn a second language, a third language. You know, shake yourself up. Don't you get fossilized. Don't you get stable. This is going to help you shake up into life the capabilities that will help you succeed in business. There's nothing moving on your sofa. I've got another kid of the three I've got. You know, he's doing these and that. He's 13. I'm fighting this as best I can. I'm calling this easy high. You know, it's the easy way of getting high. You know, look on the tablet, and look at your device, and get some putative knowledge, putative communication. It's kind of communication. It's kind of knowledge. It's not going to shake up your reserves. It's not going to rattle you. It's not going to wake you up. Go beyond those templates. Go beyond the molds. Break up the pattern. Get off the sofa. Dance. Sing. Learn to draw. Learn to paint. Learn a language. These are the capabilities. That's what Hammond is talking about. The soft skills. The skills that are completely of a different nature compared to coders. I don't know who's right or wrong, whether we need 1 million coders, whether we need 100 and not 500,000. I mean, we are both right. We can be both right, says Mr. Nikiforov. There's two people who are probably more knowledgeable about that compared to me. It's not the numbers that we are strong. It's this quality of what we have. Guys, you don't have to go very far for those examples. You know, this guy stands up and he says, I want to go to work. You know, we've got 1,000 people here. There's actually people from Sberbank sitting in the audience. And there are many, probably. And only one person stood up. And look at the emotional condition of that person. He really had to get over himself to do this. In Sberbank, we invest a lot in what we call empathy, emotional intelligence and empathy. Someone of our guys has probably told that guy that he needs to get some experience of bank telling, you know, as a teller in the bank. You know, I thought we are not doing enough to instill empathy in Sberbank. That's the way to kill the the best initiative. Guys, the most important thing is to see another person's point of view. You know, the most recent aphorism that I showed on that slide is first you get overlooked and then you win. You know, we may put him on the cash teller's desk, but then.
Добрый день всем. Меня зовут.
Good morning. My name is Sergei Stasenko. I represent the Nizhny Novgorod region, Nizhny Novgorod University, named after Lobachevsky, the mathematician. I used to develop the national system for monitoring humans with portable devices. My question goes to Mr. Greff. I do apologize for being nervous. What mechanisms exist of implementing the new technologies in your company? Also, I would like to invite you to our display. We've got an exoskeleton and smart clothes that you can use to work in. Thank you very much. As for us, in Sberbank, it's not entirely our branch. It's a branch of one of our subsidiaries. It is into health. It's called docdoc.ru. DocDoc assembles everything related to medicine, to healthcare, and wearable devices. And then we've got a family of venture funds led by Viktor Arlovsky. Are you in contact with him? You can actually come to our display, to our stand, and ask for the coordinates of Viktor Arlovsky. He's in Silicon Valley most of the time, but he is in Moscow frequently, so you can actually talk to him.
To build up on that point, perhaps it might be of value getting Kirill's opinion on this, as you see a lot of initiatives and a lot of startups coming up. What are your thoughts on that?
No.
Well, the questions were different and diverse. Actually, it's a good idea. The market of wearable devices is going to be growing very quickly. We are very much at the foot of this curve. We've got several startups in the area. I wouldn't think of competing with a Sberbank company, but I do invite them over. We are willing to look at that project. We see about 7,000 projects. 3,500 of those are screened into certain acceleration projects. We invest in 80 startups a year. You will certainly get our support if you apply. We've got all the information on the website. You're very welcome. No.
But the good news is, I think we can't waste the opportunity of having our guests here, so we can allow for one more question. Would you like to ask more questions? So we can take one more questions from the young lady in the white sweater.
Thank you very much. Спасибо большое за предоставленную.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I am from Sberbank. I actually have seen our dear CEO very many times, but he is very busy, so I didn't have the opportunity to put the question. I'm terrifically glad that I will have the opportunity to put this question now. Mr. Graf, my question is on the future of Sberbank. So far as I can tell, it's going to be an IT platform. Question: will the regional banks still exist, or is it going to be the central head office on a big scale? Thank you very much. Right, thank you. I think in December, we actually finished the development of a new strategy. In December, we are going to present this new strategy for the entire team. I don't think this is very interesting for everyone. The supervisory board is going to rule on this new strategy very shortly. But we don't see this strategy of Sberbank as a bank. We see it as an ecosystem, a Russian ecosystem, based on a platform that renders financial services. Around this financial services platform, we set ourselves about 9 areas where we can see the greatest prospect with synergies with the financial sector. So we're going to transform ourselves into a tech company based on financial services, but it's going to be operating in about 9 areas. In most of them, we have already a presence. As for the original structure, maybe we can talk about this separately, but I actually texted with this very brief message to my colleagues. Very interestingly, it's about the structures and governments. On the 19th of October, the Prime Minister of United Arab Emirates in Dubai announced the new composition of government. Now the composition is just one. Secretary General, State Minister for Artificial Intelligence, State Minister for Advanced Sciences, the State Minister for Tolerance, the State Minister of Human Resources, the State Minister of Culture and Knowledge Development, the State Minister of Higher Education and Personnel Management, and the State Minister for Production Sector and Advanced Industry Areas, and the State Minister for Health. I think this is the composition of the government of the future. I think this is going to be the principle underpinning the organization of a lot of other governments and other governance structures. I think the companies are facing a similar transformation. We are moving away from conventional structures. Thank you very much for your question.
We don't have time to take any questions. However, I would like to ask my guests in very, very few minutes if you would like the audience to leave with one message. If there's one message that you would like to just remind them before you leave, it could be an advice for them, it could be a book or a person that inspires you, or it could be a habit that you want them to remember. What would that be? And we can start with Simba Rasha, very, very briefly, in a couple of minutes, as a closing wrap-up. What would be that message?
I think the most important thing that I can ask you is, you're young, just like I am. You have absolutely nothing to lose. So ask for that big check. Walk into that big company. What is the worst that they could say? No. And if they say no, what then happens? You ask again. And never give up, and be stubborn in your dream. Because a lot of people will try and sway you, tell you it's a bad idea. If you believe in it, be absolutely stubborn with your dream and be selfish. So this is what I can offer my young colleagues.
Thank you. Mikhail?
I do apologize. I'm very nervous, just as many people who took the floor. Love life. Love your life. That's just one advice. Passion is a part of that big feeling. The bright things are always innovative. There'll be a lot of bad things in life, and a lot of unpleasant things in life. And this is the beauty of it, because something beautiful and bright comes about, and this is the drive. And this is my piece of advice to you.
Nikolai, what message that you think everyone should remember from this panel discussion?
Повторю еще раз свой месседж.
Let me reiterate my message. Keep working and studying in Russia. And together with you, we are going to do such interesting things, such interesting developments that are going to fascinate the entire world. This is a time for us. Mikhail said that a lot of bad things are going to come your way in life, but then the bright things are going to come your way. I think, guys, the most important is to find pleasant things in the unpleasant events, because you never know what's good or bad in the upshot. The bad things that might have come your way may actually prove a blessing in disguise. It may be that life will tell you that you should have been high on all those bad things. Now, what is fear? Fear is a great barrier. The fear of something unpleasant coming your way. And this fear of unpleasantness, we sometimes do not do the great things that Nikolai mentioned. I think I'm trying to do these things myself. When I start to be afraid of something, and I do fear things just like you, because we always think about those great responsibilities. I face a great responsibility for a great organization. I wake up in cold sweat in some nights. You know, my organization is 176 years old. You know, I do something wrong and the organization's history ends through my faults, through my mistakes. You know, your risks become bigger as your responsibilities grow bigger. And then you start looking into what you are afraid of, what the root causes of your fear are. And when you understand the root causes of your fears, these are probably the most important things. Keep going beyond your feelings, because your feelings are sometimes misguiding. Sometimes they do the wrong signals, they prompt the wrong actions. Sometimes you need to make the steps that your instincts guide you around. Your limbic systems guide you around some steps that you should take. Very often I take the steps that normal people in normal situations would not take. But then you do make that step. Sometimes those are faux pas, the wrong steps. But the greatest pleasantries, the greatest things come when you do things having overcome yourself. And these prove the happiest and the most flattering for you. You know, my advice to you and to myself is just listen to yourself.
Yes, I agree, and I support the previous speaker, Mr. Graf, that audacity does not mean not being afraid. Audacity means to overcome this fear. I'd like to say about two arts. Well, arts is something that you cannot, you cannot be ideal in arts. You can improve yourself, but you won't be ideal in art. And the first art is to tell truth to yourself, because it should be an important thing. You will understand what you like and what you don't like, because, we are talking about following our dreams, but we need to understand what we want. What is our dream? And for that, we need to speak truth to ourselves and to be as truthful as possible when you answer the question what I want and what I do not want. And the second art is to understand what is important and what is less important. You cannot be perfect here, but you should also always develop that skill. And you should really not be too lazy to dive deep in details, to understand the DNA of your problem, and to do the most important things. And other things you might delegate to something else or not to do it at all.
In conclusion, I'm overwhelmed by a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions. But thank you very much for all of the thoughts that you've shared. I've written down a couple of notes that I will leave tonight when I go back to London. I will leave with them. One is, I'm jealous, because I think when I was your age, I didn't have the opportunity to get such forums and such panels and engage with such leaders. You should feel very lucky that you have this opportunity and that the environment in your country is setting you up for this. And second of all is just two quotes that I was told when I was going through some challenging times. One was by my mother. She told me being fearless doesn't mean that you don't have any fear. It just means that something else is more important than fear. And I've followed this throughout my career, and I think in so many cases from what our guests have shared today, this was what they had implied. And finally, for all of you young people who are questioning what next step should be, I tell you, your next step does not have to be a perfect step. It just has to be a step in any direction. As long as you're moving, then you're progressing. So in summary and in conclusion, I'd like to really thank our guests today, Kirill, Herman, Nikolai, Mikhail, and Simba. Thank you very much for your time. On behalf of everyone, we really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Наура, вы тоже не бойтесь, вы переезжайте в Россию.
You should not be afraid as well. You should not be afraid. Come to Russia. Don't be afraid.